Is China on the verge of collapse? Well, I don't think that's the case. I don't think we're going to see the Chinese, the whole country collapse or anything like that. But there are some interesting phenomena that have been, I don't know, would it be phenomena, I guess, that have been occurring. So ever since the lockdown has been slowly letting up around the country, the economy, people have to realize that what China did was unprecedented in human history. And what currently is happening around the world is unprecedented. We truly live in some strange times. So when China shut down, most of their factories factories across the country were offline for several weeks. So many people speculated that would cause some international issues with trade flow and supply chains. Now, some people, some people who claim to be experts were saying, there'll be no supply chain disruptions. Everything in China's always got weird fucking shit going on, and this is just another weird shit going on. But in general, they'll be fine. Now, that being said, a lot of the factories were shut down across the country. And even when China let up on the contagion measures, and they started letting people come out, there were lots of reports across China of, you can find these different things. There's articles, videos, all kinds of information that came out that factories were not opening up fully. So the factories were not bringing all the workers back in because some of the factory owners were afraid about letting the people come back to work and then having to quarantine their workforce. So owners were, this is all obviously not first-hand information. This is second-hand information that factory workers in China and owners and managers were cautious to bring in some of the workers at the beginning because they didn't want their crews infected. And they they wanted to protect some of their, probably profits right after this thing gets back to normal. So you don't want to maybe prematurely bring your workforce back in and then have everybody get sick, and then, when everything starts ramping up, you've got no workforce. Now, that's one thing. But another thing that was interesting was how in China, one of the situations that occurred was that even though the Chinese government was trying to push people back to work, you can follow a guy on online. His name is, he's a professor, economics professor, Professor Balding, and he's got on Twitter, his Twitter handle's Balding's World, and he's really, really solid at data analysis. He's not somebody you would want to have lead you into battle. He's not somebody that you'd want to have make necessarily policy recommendations in uncertainty, but in terms of looking at data, doing some investigative research into data, he's solid. And he was showing on War Room Pandemic, the show with Steve Bannon, he did a really good job of basically looking into how, looking into the traffic patterns of certain big cities in China. And for several weeks, the traffic patterns were very low, even though the Chinese government said people were going back to work. So, the economy was offline for a long time. I also know from firsthand experience, I know lots of people in China whose parents were not allowed to go to work for a long time. I know the students are still not allowed to go back to school. In fact, in my opinion, this is one of the most interesting insights, or one of the most interesting situations that's happening there. So I have not done the research myself, but I've heard, because there's just so much flying around, information flying around right now, that in most countries, especially the ones that did measures early, the first things they did was stop the schools, close down the schools. Even before, banning, locking down cities, a lot of places were shutting down schools, like Japan, Taiwan actually extended their winter vacation before people were to come back. some people try to say that Taiwan didn't have to close schools, but it's actually not true. When the outbreak started, Taiwan's schools were already in a winter vacation. In fact, that's how it was in China as well. And so for the Lunar New Year. And so what Taiwan did was they just extended that vacation for a longer period of time, for several weeks actually. And I know because I think they did it for elementary schools all the way up to college, because I know a college student who said that it was probably about a month or so after the winter holiday was supposed to end that she was still not in school. So that was her situation. So most places closed down schools first. And schools seem to be a very important, what they would call, vector for the spread of the virus. And I assume it has to do with the fact that you have lots of kids together, and it's a perfect mixing ground for lots of people to get together, exchange germs, and then bring it back to their families. And also it's kids, right? So kids and younger people, they're a little bit more risky with their behavior, maybe not as hygienic. So, especially the little ones. So you see that schools are canceled as a sign that measures need to be taken. Now, I went off on this tangent because in China, the schools are still closed. In mainland China, the schools are still closed. There might be one or two places where they are open, but I know for a fact that many schools across the entire country are still closed. And so, in my opinion, that's really important, because that means the virus situation is still unclear, and they still view it as a significant threat, whatever exactly is going on. And so the Chinese economy has not fully normalized, right? People are not going out to the major shopping centers and doing the same things. I know from contacts, I don't want to say from contacts, I just know from talking to people that live in China, live in Beijing, that, they're just not going out like they used to, right? Like they're not going out and doing the same amount of things. There's not as much of a push to go to the stores, to go to the malls, that kind of stuff. Though, of course, there is data that it's picking up. Now, the reason I went into this whole, kind of diatribe about that is because there seems to be some kind of evidence, or there looks like there's things brewing that the Chinese people, some of the Chinese people, are on the verge of protests, on the verge of, I don't want to say revolution, but major political dissent. So, to give you a clue about the first piece that I heard, was about I'd say about 2 weeks ago. There was some video that came out of Hubei, and it was between Hubei and a neighboring province. I don't remember which one. And the people of Hubei were being checked across a bridge by police officers, and from the neighboring province, because the neighboring province did not want to allow people from Hubei into their province, because they didn't really believe that the situation was safe, even though the government said the situation was safe in Hubei. This is before they let the people in Wuhan go free. They first let the area outside of Wuhan, in Greater Hubei, they were letting them go free first, letting them come out of their houses and go back to work. Now, when that happened, there was, the neighboring provinces did not want to let in people from Hubei. They thought the people from Hubei were infected, still had problems. There was some kind of skirmish, some kind of scuffle between some police officers from one province and another. It would be kind of like if, some DPS officers from Texas and Oklahoma got into a scuffle, and then then that blew up into a wider situation where there was this huge protest on a bridge, where they were pushing over cars and things like that. And you got to remember, China's a big country. Just because a part of China there's a protest or some kind of social unrest, it doesn't necessarily mean that is a trend that could be extrapolated across the rest of the country. But it does mean that there has to be a large amount of, there's got to be a lot of pent up, a lot of building anger, a lot of building frustration with what's been going on for something like this to break out, especially now. And we know, well, I don't want to say we know, but it also appears that the government does not want this kind of unrest to boil over now. Right now they need control. They need people to have faith in the system. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and I'll be right back after this sponsor. Okay, so let's get back into it. So I was talking about the protests going on in Hubei. Now, in addition to that, there's been other video and there have been other things that have been coming out of China that show other kinds of frustration. So one of them is there have been two protests I've seen. Both of them looked like they were in Wuhan. One of them, I don't know what it was about, but people were walking around in the street protesting something. So of course, who knows what the fuck that is, and I couldn't understand it all. But there was another protest which appeared to show a bunch of shop owners peacefully protesting their rents. So they were protesting the fact that, these people have not been allowed to work for, since January 28th. They have not been allowed to work since January 28th. And now they're being kind of pushed out. Now, a lot of people might say but the government took care of them, or the government provided them with this. And what you need to understand is that's not necessarily the case. There's just so many strange reports and commentary coming out of China right now of people that died of starvation in their homes. Not that was necessarily common, but the people in that part of the country were not allowed to leave, when they were not allowed to work. Many people probably lost their entire livelihoods. So people are coming out of this situation completely economically devastated. And so they are, people that had maybe restaurants or small shops, they were out in front of a mall, and I think it was called the World Mall, the World Shop, something like that. And they were sitting and protesting their rents. And that's not the first time. That there have been several instances across China of that being the case, where people are protesting their rents because they simply haven't been working. Now, there's also been some interesting other information. This is from somebody on Twitter named Dovey Wan, and she is a crypto, I guess you would say she's a kind of a crypto expert, kind of a Bitcoin expert, as much as you could be one, she's very familiar with the territory. She knows the ins and outs of a lot of Bitcoin phenomena, and she is a native Chinese. And this is what she had to say. So I've been following her for crypto stuff for a while, and she had interesting commentary on the virus as well. But she said, wondering if there is an English word meaning hatred towards rich people. In Chinese, it's, I can't read this, I haven't seen that before, but it says, which is strong behavior emerging in China now. She says she can see it in the US too. But in the last 20 years, people like Jack Ma is the one who created Alibaba, which is like one of the biggest e-commerce platforms in the world. People like Jack Ma is considered an idol and role model for young Chinese. Many super rich Chinese are very low profile in lifestyle, but still get pretty harsh scrutiny, even making totally legit money. And they get harsh scrutiny, even able to make money becomes a moral sin instead of validation of business confidence. This reminds me of the Cultural Revolution time. So basically she's saying that very rich people are being attacked and scrutinized just because they have money, even if they did it in completely ethical ways or they had strong, good business competence. She said that reminds her of the Cultural Revolution. So the Cultural Revolution was a time in China's history back in the 70s where Mao advocated for the destruction of the old traditional ways of China, Chinese history, Chinese culture, and it was a quote-unquote communist-based revolution. So people's wealth was confiscated, people's property was confiscated, people's parents were, people were ratting out their parents for not going along, scholars were killed across the country. At that time, universities, there was no school for like 10 years. It was a very crazy time in China, but it was very much born out of a socialist ideal. Even though Mao was a dictator, it was a socialist communist idea, which is what encouraged people, right? So the idea of private property at that time was frowned upon. You couldn't have private property, so everyone's private property was seized. There's actually very interesting accounts of during that time, people had, if people had silverware or like not, forks and knives, but like cooking utensils, everybody's things were stolen and used for the quote-unquote common good. They were melted down for things to be used in communes and things. She said, China is a great soil for socialism as it was just out of the textbook-style communistic system for a bit over 30 years. My parents grew up in a completely communistic-style planned economy, and I grew up in more of a market economy after open-end reforms starting in 1979. She said China's GDP per capita is just reaching $10,000, the level of 1979 USA. Many experienced a dramatic living standard uplift, are looking for more prosperity down the road, hunger and determined. She says she's a bit shocked about the anger and hatred towards the rich vibe is getting so strong at the current stage. She said, in her opinion, the slowdown of the economy is more of a reason instead of the communist dictatorship, though both can be intertwined. She said, as the hatred towards the rich people group is largely overlapped with the group who praised the CCP the most and heavily relied on the government's justice, sort of to say. Yeah, so I don't quite, here's what I have to say about that. I know from personal experience, I have some Chinese friends, people I went to college with for about a year in China, 6 months to a year. And there was definitely, here's the thing, I am not surprised by this at all. I am not surprised at all because I am growing up in an era of watching indoctrination and the effects of indoctrination. For example, I almost spoke Chinese there. For example, one of the effects of propaganda and indoctrination. For example, when people talked about the virus from Wuhan, this is very prescient. This is a very obvious example. When people talked about the virus coming from Wuhan, if you absorbed the propaganda properly, if you were indoctrinated properly, then your response to somebody saying Wuhan virus was that, or Wuhan pneumonia, which is what everyone called it even in China or out in Asia at that time. If you called it Wuhan pneumonia, then the automatic response was, it's xenophobic, you are being racist, you'll incite hatred. If you talked anything about China or anything like that with regard to the virus, no matter how, you didn't have to say anything negative about Asian people, but if you just made the relation, then it was, oh, you're indoctrinated. Then they were saying, oh, you're racist, xenophobic, blah, blah, blah. If you did not want to go to a Chinatown restaurant, it was because you were xenophobic or racist. But they didn't follow the logic that, actually, the reason behind making that decision is that many people from China might visit Chinatown to get food and groceries, and if those people recently came from the mainland where there was an outbreak, that's a problem. Okay? Now, of course, that's just logical. It just makes sense that some people might not want to go to a Lunar New Year celebration in New York or San Francisco, or even Houston for that matter, while there's a coronavirus outbreak. Now, if you brought up legitimate concern about going to large events or anything related to maybe an Asian or a Chinese Lunar New Year gathering at that time, you were labeled xenophobic, racist, so that is a textbook sign of somebody who cannot think or who has limited thinking capacity. And their first thing that comes to mind is a stock set of answers and stock set of decisions that they've been fed. So I have grown up with this. This is what woke culture is. If you know what being woke is, it's about, the preferred gender pronouns. It's about how everything is a result of racist, sexist power struggle. Now, when people use terms like, the patriarchy and stuff like that, most of the time those people don't actually understand any of the logic behind their argument. There's actually, or they don't understand the origin, they don't understand the thought process, they don't understand the purpose going forward of the arguments they are making. And that's what allows them to continue in their ignorance, because they actually don't understand what they're saying, what they're doing. Now, I have grown up with this, especially the last, I would say, 5 to 8 years, been very prevalent, extremely prevalent in our culture. So because of that, I am not surprised about now what I'm seeing in China, because I knew Chinese friends at the time who were very, very normal by Western standards in terms of they're like young people like anywhere. They want to go out and they want to party and they want to drink and they want to do this. However, if you talked about communism, a lot of them were on board. They weren't on board in the sense that they wanted to have the government start giving them wages all of a sudden and not be able to go to work. That's not what they wanted. But at a very deep level, they were indoctrinated as children to believe that communism is actually a legitimate system that actually works for especially a population of 1.4 billion people, and especially involuntarily, right? So they were indoctrinated so heavily through school, through culture, through probably sometimes family, and also the lack of emphasis pushed on free thought, and the lack of ability to think freely as a young person. Because of those reasons, I am not at all surprised that they would support or that they would be angry about people making money or being rich in China. I'm not surprised at all if they were to have a socialist revolution and support the CCP, even though the CCP is what got them into this mess, the Chinese Communist Party. So I'm not surprised, because they've been taught that it is the capitalists are evil, and it's the government that is looking, trying to help them. And so some of these people are maybe they're misplacing their anger. Maybe they're misplacing their frustration, and they think, the reason I don't have food is because these wealthy people, are corrupted and they took all the food. Right? Maybe people are angry because they realize they don't have anything, but some people have it all. And I understand that. I understand that anger. I understand that frustration. We see that here in the United States too, but we don't see it as much. But when you have an entire population brainwashed that communism is what has worked in China, even though it's the opposite, it's the lack of communism which has allowed them to flourish as much as they have, I'm not surprised that people now want maybe more communism to deal with the fact. It's almost like they want the disease more than they want the cure to their problem, because they don't realize that they don't understand that what just gave them the recent disease is going to make their economic disease even worse. So this is where they are. There's a guy named Kyle Bass, who also talked about how the other leadership in China is pushing against Xi Jinping, the current CCP leader, and that people are starting to get upset. So it looks like there's lots of civil unrest going on. Looks like people are angry at the rich elites. People are angry at people from Wuhan. People from Wuhan and Hubei are angry at people from outside of Wuhan and Hubei. And also the leadership in different parts of China might be getting to their last straw with the current leader, Xi Jinping. Now, I think if that is the case, if there is pressure being put on Xi Jinping, I think that, we might need to look out for some dramatic actions that might occur. I've heard that China's been more acting more risky lately with regard to Taiwan. They sank a Vietnamese fishing boat not too long ago. So things could be heating up on a foreign level, on a foreign relations level between China and the rest of the world. Anyway, that's all I got to say for today. You can follow me on my website, tstuch.com, tstuch.com. You can follow me on Twitter, tstuch1, tstuch1. You can follow me on, where else? Twitter, YouTube. It's Taylor Space Stuch, Taylor Space Stuch, Stuch. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Taylor Radio. Today, I'm going to talk about Unrest brewing within the Middle Kingdom. Unrest brewing within China. What is happening? Are people on the verge of overthrowing the government? Maybe. You'll have to listen and find out. So, you can follow me on my website, tstuch.com, tstuch.com. Follow me on Twitter, tstuch1, tstuch1. Follow me on YouTube, Taylor Space Stuch, Taylor Space Stuch. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the episode.